When his turn finally came, Lin Yi took his post at the cave's jagged mouth, Lu Linhai's cold steel bar gripped firmly in his hand. He used his threads of fate to establish a sensory link with Chu Kai, seeking to bypass the limits of his own perception. Maintaining the connection was a specialized form of agony. Chu Kai's enhanced senses were overwhelming, a flood of data that his mind struggled to interpret. The hypersensitivity made every nerve ending tingle with a phantom discomfort, but it was the only way to ensure they weren't being flanked in the dark. Lin Yi managed the burden by pulsing the connection, using Chu Kai's ability to sweep the surroundings before severing the link to let his senses recover. The exercise served a dual purpose. It protected the group while allowing him to test the boundaries of his evolving power. But as he connected for the third time, the silence of the night was shattered by a sound that made his blood run cold. It sounded like bone or heavy wood being splintered by an immense force. The sounds were alien and visceral, cutting through the forest's ambient noise with terrifying clarity. The distant echoes refused to fade, a relentless, ghostly vibration that clawed at the edge of hearing. Lin Yi sat motionless, his mind racing through every possibility, yet the source of the noise remained a terrifying enigma. His gaze drifted toward his friends, who were surrendered to a heavy, exhausted slumber. Despite the quiet, a cold knot of dread tightened in his chest. Caution was his only ally in a place like this. Lin Yi slipped silently from the cave's mouth, compelled to find the origin of that unsettling sound. The midnight forest was a landscape of raw dread. Twisted branches clawed at the air like skeletal limbs, as if the trees themselves were demons bargaining for a soul. Moonlight struggled to penetrate the canopy, and even with his enhanced senses, the world was a blur of gray and obsidian. A sharp pressure throbbed behind his eyes, but he refused to turn back. Ignorance was a death sentence out here. A sudden movement in the brush caught his eye. He froze, tracking the flicker of shadow. Just rats. Scrawny, desperate rodents scurrying through the undergrowth. But the sounds weren't right. The frantic pitter-patter of their tiny paws didn't match the heavy echoing he'd heard earlier. Something was wrong. The rats weren't hunting. They were fleeing, their eyes wide with a terror that surpassed instinct. Then, their flight faltered. Their movements became clumsy, their limbs twitching as if controlled by invisible strings. One by one, the rodents collapsed, their bodies sagging onto the damp forest floor in a silent, unnatural defeat. Something was coming. A series of rapid, sliding sounds cut through the silence, heading straight for the paralyzed rodents. Lin Yi's eyes narrowed, his gaze locked on the forest floor. A dark, sinuous shape was dragging itself through the dirt, emitting a low, dry shh sound as it moved. He shifted his weight, twisting and leaning to peer through the gaps in the gnarled bark, desperate for a clear look at the intruder. The movement was inhumanly fast. A long, slender appendage writhed across the earth with a terrifying, fluid grace. Without warning, the thing lashed out. It coiled around a rat like a whip, hoisting the helpless creature into the moonlight as if displaying a trophy. The sound was final. Every bone in the rat's body shattered instantly under the thing's crushing embrace. Lin Yi's mind raced. A snake? The way it moved, the way it killed, it had all the hallmarks of a serpent. But then, the thing didn't feed. It lowered the mangled remains and snapped back into the darkness with a speed no snake could possess. If it wasn't a predator, then what kind of monster was he witnessing? Lin Yi's brow furrowed, a grim determination settling over him as he took a few more calculated steps forward. Avoiding the jagged thorns of the gnarled trees, he traced the path where the mysterious appendage had vanished. Bathed in the pale, sickly glow of the moon, he found a figure standing perfectly still in the center of the clearing. The realization hit him like a physical blow. It was Flower. He clenched his jaw, the pieces of the puzzle finally snapping into place. He should have seen it sooner. Rats were fast, instinctually driven to survive. They wouldn't have just frozen in place for no reason. There was only one thing capable of paralyzing them so completely, that intoxicating floral scent radiating from the girl before him. But why? Why would someone like her be out here, hunting in the dead of night? And those sinuous things? Were they silk lines? Some kind of predatory trap? No, he'd seen the mantis wolf's webs before. These weren't static threads. They were alive, writhing with a purpose that was entirely alien. Besides, there was no sign of any other monster. Only Flower, standing silent amidst the slaughter. As Lin Yi watched in frozen silence, a series of wet, rustling sounds erupted from Flower's silhouette. Dozens of those serpentine appendages burst from her sides, writhing like a nest of disturbed vipers. In the clear moonlight, the truth was undeniable. They weren't external tools or traps. They were vines, fleshy, pulsating growths sprouting directly from her very skin. The sight was grotesque, a violation of nature that left Lin Yi breathless. But the nightmare was only beginning. The vines twisted with a sickening fluid grace, hoisting the mangled rats upward until they were level with Flower's face. Flower tilted her head, her neck swaying with an uncanny, rhythmic motion that felt more botanical than human. Then, her skull began to change. A wet, tearing sound echoed as her head slowly split open from the crown. Her flesh peeled back in 8 perfect segments, unfurling like the petals of some demonic bloom under the lunar glow. A thick, fleshy stamen erupted from the center of her neck, a pulsing organ of pure hunger. In that moment, she was no longer a girl. She was a flower in full, horrific bloom. The stamen lashed out, snatching the rats from the vines and dragging them greedily into the dark, wet cavern of her throat. That same eerie noise from before returned, the sound of her internal acids dissolving the rodents into a slurry of bone and fur. Lin Yi's entire frame began to shudder, a violent tremor born not of cowardice, but of absolute bone-deep shock. The girl who had guided them, who had offered them a semblance of safety. This girl named Flower was nothing more than a freak in human skin. He recalled her cryptic words, realization dawning with a terrifying clarity. Her fragrance wasn't a divine gift. It was her natural scent, the smell of a predator. But the question remained, why? Why had she played the part of a savior? Doubt clawed at his mind. He had used Chu Kai's enhanced senses to scrutinize her. He had heard her heartbeat, a steady, rhythmic pulse that was indistinguishable from a human's. Lin Yi's breath hitched, his mind stalling on that single detail, the heartbeat. If she had been standing here in the clearing all this time, why had the sound of her heart suddenly vanished? He stared at the grotesque figure before him, the truth cold and heavy in his chest. Flower didn't have a heartbeat now, and she never had one to begin with. The realization was a freezing wave. Everything she had shown them, every pulse, every breath was a calculated lie. She was a freak, a biological anomaly, much like those parasitic hair snails, a creature that functioned without a heart. The steady thrumming he'd heard before was nothing but a calculated mimicry. Flower had synthesized the sound of life to hide her monstrous nature. Using her internal stamen, or some other hidden organ, she had rhythmically pounded out a fake heartbeat. It was a perfect, if unnervingly powerful, deception. This creature was far more sophisticated and cautious than any threat he'd encountered in the city. Her ability to imitate humanity made her even more dangerous than the mantis wolves. Lin Yi forced his lungs to expand, drawing in a steadying breath. He had to remain calm. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. Flower hadn't turned her vines on them yet. For the moment, she was content with hunting the forest's rodents. They were safe, but only by her grace. Her motives remained a mystery, but one thing was clear. This clearing was a death trap. Trusting a freak was a mistake he wouldn't make. The decision was made. As soon as Chu Kai and the others stirred at dawn, they would abandon this place. But leaving wouldn't be as simple as walking away. He needed a plan, a defense against the possibility of a sudden lethal strike from their guardian. Lin Yi turned on his heel, his movements slow and deliberate as he began the trek back toward the safety of the cave. But as he retreated into the thicket, a cold shiver raced down his spine. Something was wrong. The forest had become unnervingly quiet. The horrific sounds of flowers feeding, the wet tearing, and the caustic sizzle had vanished as if they had never existed. The silence was absolute, a heavy, suffocating weight that made his heart hammer against his ribs. He was no longer the observer, he was the prey. Lin Yi's heart hammered against his ribs the moment the silence settled. It was a suffocating weight. Cold, slick sweat broke out across his brow. He didn't dare wipe it away. Every muscle was locked in place. He already knew he'd been found. Moving with agonizing slowness, he risked a single look over his shoulder. In the skeletal shadows of the twisted woods, the creature called Flower had stopped her feeding. Her gaze was locked onto the cave's mouth, onto him. Lashing vines erupted from her body, snaking around a gnarled trunk with violent intent. With a sickening jerk, she hauled her massive, distorted frame forward. Another vine struck a distant tree, dragging her closer with predatory efficiency. The distance was vanishing. A voice drifted from the raw hollow of her neck, unsettlingly melodic.
So, you caught a glimpse.
The beauty of the sound only made his skin crawl more. Her head remained split wide, revealing a pulpy, crimson interior mapped with a network of throbbing veins. The fleshy stamen at the center of her neck swayed, angling itself toward him like a compass needle finding north. It was hunting him. Lin Yi gritted his teeth, his vision focusing. That stamen, it had to be the weak point. He gripped the steel bar, pouring every ounce of desperate strength into the throw. He never expected a single throw to work. It was a feint, a gamble for time. The instant the bar left his hand, he dove back into the cave, his fingers clawing for the cold weight of the shotgun on the stone floor. He whirled around, the weapon leveled, his finger tightening on the trigger. But the vines were faster, a blur of movement that defied his reflexes. Before he could even pull the trigger, a cluster of thick, organic ropes surged up his body, pinning his arms and legs against the cold stone. More vines coiled around the shotgun, a slender, needle-like tip snaked into the trigger guard, wedging itself firmly behind the trigger and locking the mechanism. Lin Yi opened his mouth to scream for Lu Lin Hai, but a vine whipped around his face, forcing itself between his teeth and silencing him. This freak was a different class entirely. It wasn't just raw power, she was intelligent, calculating. She wasn't just reacting. She was predicting his every move, staying one step ahead of his desperation. Yet there was one thing she couldn't account for, the true nature of his power. It was his only opening. Focused through the panic, Lin Yi mentally snapped the thread of fate connecting him to Chu Kai. In an instant, he wove the shimmering filament to Cheng Dao, anchoring his survival to the butcher's strength. The vines tightened, dragging his bound form across the rough ground and out into the night air. As they moved, Flower's grotesque head finally snapped shut, the petals fused back into the serene, girl-like face he had first encountered.
I didn't expect you to witness that.
Flower's expression was a mask of unnatural serenity. Neither joy nor sorrow rippled across her features as she looked down at him.
You're only the second person to ever see my true form. Though, I must say, your reaction is quite different from the first.
Lin Yi didn't bother listening. He was funneling every scrap of his mental energy into the knife buried in the dirt nearby. Controlling this borrowed power and Chengdao's power was clumsy work. He lacked the butcher's effortless, lethal grace. A direct assault would be suicide. The vines would swat the blade away before it even got close. He needed a distraction, a sneak attack. Muffled, desperate groans vibrated in his throat as he thrashed against his bonds, drawing her focus. While she watched his struggle, he commanded the knife to rise. It drifted silently from the loose earth, positioning itself behind her. The strategy was sound, but he had underestimated her instincts. Without even turning, Flower's hand blurred upward. A sharp, horizontal chop struck the hilt with bone-jarring force. The impact sent a shockwave through Lin Yi's mind, severing his telekinetic connection for a fraction of a second. It was all the opening the vines needed. They swarmed over the fallen knife, binding it tight against the ground.
A sneak attack. Predictable. Your combat style is all brute force. No technique. No finesse. You rely far too much on your innate abilities. Once those methods fail, you naturally look for another way. Aside from trying to wake your friends, this was your only option left. You cannot defeat me like this, Lin Yi.
Lin Yi's brow furrowed in the dark. She was right. Since the first freak appeared, he'd been running for his life. There had been no time for training. Their entire group's combat knowledge was just a collection of Chengdao's half-remembered butcher routines. For the butcher, overwhelming strength masked the flaws. For Lin Yi and the others, those flaws were a death sentence. He stared at her, refusing to yield. He prepared to clamp his jaw down on the vine, gagging him, hoping to tear through it.
I wouldn't. The sap in these vines is highly acidic. Biting through will dissolve your mouth in seconds. Your throat will be gone before you can even attempt to swallow.
Lin Yi hesitated, the threat chilling his blood. He had one final card, shared fate. If he could link a thread to her, her life would end with his. But as he searched, he saw nothing. No thread of fate existed between them. Without it, there was no immediate lethal intent to exploit.
I can feel your hostility, but it truly is unnecessary. I told you before, I won't hurt you.
He felt the vines tighten as she spoke, a firm pressure that never reached the point of breaking bone.
You are far too tense. Just sleep now. When you wake up, you should gather your things and leave this place.
A strange, heavy fragrance suddenly filled the clearing, thick and sweet. A wave of absolute exhaustion crashed over his mind. Lin Yi's eyes fluttered shut, and he sank into a black, dreamless void.
What the hell is wrong with you? You were supposed to be on watch. How could you just pass out like that? You were dead to the world. I even heard you laughing in your sleep. Some guard you are.
Lin Yi offered no excuse. The memories of the night were too sharp, too visceral to be dismissed as mere dreams. He scrambled to his feet, eyes darting around the small cave before frantically checking his own body for injuries. Everyone was still there. Unharmed, Flower hadn't lied. She really hadn't hurt them. He couldn't make sense of it. Was Lu Linhai actually right? Could there really be good freaks in this nightmare? And Chengdao was already up, his gaze steady. Beside him, Chu Kai and Zhang Cheng were still lost in their own slumber. If Flower's words held any weight, they would be waking up soon enough. The group snapped into action. the lingering lethargy of sleep vanishing instantly as they rushed toward the cave mouth. A mantis wolf plummeted from the gray dawn sky, slamming into the hard-packed earth with a sickening crunch. Its iridescent insectoid wings were nothing more than charred ruins. Even the thick beetle carapace that protected its vitals had been blasted into jagged, blackened fragments. Lin Yi's instincts took over. He immediately anchored a thread of fate to Chu Kai, sharpening his perception as he peered toward the impact site. A figure emerged from the morning mist, a man walking with a calm, leisurely pace toward the dying beast. He wore massive industrial metal gauntlets. Embedded in the back of each plate was a crystalline shard, pulsing with a familiar, eerie light. It was the same material Lin Yi had seen before, the ammunition in Cheng Dao's shotgun and the cold heart of the key itself. A man stands in the distance, his hair slicked back with so much resin it looks like a sculpted helmet, immune to the wind. He wears a black leather jacket, the rivets catching the moonlight as he walks with a rhythmic, arrogant swagger. A contemptuous sneer twists his lips as he looks down at the broken mantis wolf. His eyes are hollow, shadowed by deep, dark circles, either from exhaustion or a deliberate, smoky vanity. A tattooed letter R marks his right cheek. The man exuded a heavy metal, retro-industrial exhaustion. The fallen beast is still clinging to life. As the man approaches, it lashes out with a desperate, serrated strike. The stranger doesn't even flinch. He simply reaches out and catches the lethal, lashing limb with his bare hand.
Saw a fire nearby. Figured I'd come investigate.
His voice is a low mutter, but it carries clearly to Lin Yi through the cold night air.
Didn't expect to find a stray mantis wolf wandering around out here, though. I thought you disgusting things were all rounded up by those bastards who call themselves creators.
Creators? Lin Yi's brow furrows. Is he talking about the masters? This man knows things. He has the crystal weapons, and he knows about the creators. He knows far more than Brother Lei ever did. If we can take him, if we can squeeze him for answers, we might finally understand what this world really is. Lin Yi feels a surge of anticipation, but he holds his position. The man is dangerous, very dangerous.
Lin Yi, talk to me. What's going on out there?
Lu Linhai's voice is a frantic whisper. From his position, he's blind to the carnage below, only able to see the shadows dancing at the edge of the cave.
Why did that monster just fall? It looked like it was swiped out of the sky.
Lin Yi quickly recounts the stranger's arrival and his effortless neutralization of the mantis wolf.
The man. He's likely from the City of Oracle. City of Oracle? If he's a citizen, then he's our golden ticket. We catch him, we squeeze him, and we finally get some real answers.
The voice comes from the darkness behind them, making Lu Linhai nearly jump out of his skin.
Zhang Cheng, when the hell did you wake up?
Lu Linhai turns to see Zhang Cheng standing there, looking remarkably refreshed.
Just now. Honestly, that was the best sleep I've had since this nightmare started.
What about Chu Kai? Is he stirring yet?
Nah, he's out cold. Sleeping like a dead pig.
Zhang Cheng joins them at the cave mouth, his eyes locking onto the distant figure in the moonlight. Lin Yi hadn't been surprised. His borrowed hearing had tracked Zhang Cheng's casual, slow approach from the moment his breathing changed. He couldn't help but feel a twinge of envy. Back in the city, he had always admired the powers Chu Kai and Uncle An possessed. Even if this strength was only temporary, alone from a destiny he didn't fully understand, it felt right.
I'm thinking the same thing. However, taking him won't be as simple as you think.
Lin Yi's gaze remains fixed on the stranger. He can feel the raw, overwhelming pressure emanating from the man even at this distance.
This newcomer, he's powerful beyond anything we've seen.
How powerful? Are we talking Uncle in levels of strength? If he's weaker than Uncle An, we should just charge him. We have the numbers.
Lin Yi's voice drops. becoming heavy with a growing sense of dread.
The man, he just snapped that mantis wolf's forearm like a dry twig with one hand.
Uncle Ann can do that too. It's just physics. You get the right leverage on the joint, and
He didn't use the joint, Lin Yi.
Lin Yi's interruption is sharp, silencing Lu Linhai. They both know the terrifying reality of a mantis wolf's beetle carapace. Every encounter has taught them that the joints are the only vulnerable spots. Even with a heavy bone-chopping knife and all his strength, Uncle Ann could barely leave a scratch on the main armor. But the man below, he hadn't used a fulcrum. He had simply exerted raw, crushing power, shattering the hardened shell as if it were glass. Lin Yi's eyes fixate on the glowing gauntlets. He remembers the energy stored in the shotgun shells. If those crystals could blast through a monster's hide, then the ones on this man's gauntlets likely provided the same devastating destruction.
Quit pretending to be dead. I know you disgusting things are harder to kill than that.
The stranger's voice drifts up from the darkness, cold and dripping with clinical cruelty. In the distance, having shattered the forearm, the man turns his attention to the wicked spikes protruding from the monster's carapace. He snaps one off as if he were idly picking at a scab, his movements relaxed. Yet each sound of fracturing bones seems to fuel a dark, suppressed excitement in his eyes.
Hundreds of millions of years. You species survived all that time, yet here you are, playing dead like a common cockroach.
Lin Yi is paralyzed by the stranger's words. The sheer scale of the timeline is incomprehensible.
Hundreds of millions of years. What kind of era was that even?
maybe the age of the dinosaurs? You know, the big lizards and all that?
Lin Yi, if you have no idea what you're talking about, it's better to just keep your mouth shut.
Hey, I was a science major, okay? History wasn't exactly my priority.
Shut it. Lin Yi, tell me exactly what he said. Don't summarize, give me his words verbatim.
Lin Yi takes a breath, repeating the stranger's low mutter with perfect accuracy, his enhanced memory capturing every inflection of the man's clinical disdain. Zhang Cheng's brow furrows, his glasses catching the moonlight as he sinks into a deep analytical silence.
The Cambrian period. That has to be what he means.
Zhang Cheng's fingers trace the edge of his chin, his mind working with a frantic, obsessive energy.
The Cambrian. What? Is that a brand of watch or something?
Forget what the textbooks told us. Half of that was probably lies anyway. The Cambrian period is widely considered the dawn of complex life. It's when everything we recognize today first appeared on Earth.
He mumbles to himself, his voice becoming a rapid-fire staccato of concepts and theories. Suddenly, his eyes flare with a wild, terrifying spark of realization.
The Cambrian explosion!
What explosion? Did something blow up back then too?
It wasn't a bomb, Lin Yi. It was a biological surge. In a blink of geological time, the variety of life on this planet didn't just grow, it exploded.
Okay, great. History lesson over. What does a bunch of ancient fossils have to do with the monsters trying to eat us?
Think about it. If our history was rewritten to hide the truth, then what if the Cambrian explosion wasn't the beginning of life? What if a complete advanced ecosystem already existed before that? An ecosystem of creatures so alien, so powerful, that their existence had to be erased from the record. It wasn't just a natural shift, it was a slaughter. A planetary-scale genocide intended to wipe those original inhabitants from the face of the Earth. But the genocide failed. Some of them went into hiding. They burrowed into the deepest cracks of the world, falling into a slumber that lasted hundreds of millions of years. And now, for reasons we can't even begin to guess, the original owners of this planet are waking up. And those creatures, those ancient original inhabitants, they are the freaks. Fascinating. Absolutely intriguing.
Zhang Cheng's hands tightened into white-knuckled fists. A tremor of raw excitement coursed through him, ignited by the radical deductions taking root in his mind.
Aeons ago, hundreds of millions of years, something systematic began the purge of the freaks, a campaign of extinction against the world's original tenants. And once the bloodbath was over, they seeded this planet with new life, what we call the Cambrian explosion. Slowly, over countless millennia, the world as we perceive it began to crystallize. The traces of the freaks were scrubbed. History was rewritten, a grand fabrication to hide the truth. This wasn't evolution. This was an invasion.
He tilted his head back, a sharp, cynical light dancing in his gaze.
I wouldn't be surprised if they even invented a holiday to celebrate the massacre.
You're telling me these things have existed for hundreds of millions of years?
Lu Linhai's voice cracked, thick with disbelief.
Before humanity was even a thought? If that's the case, then what kind of killers were they dealing with back then?
Zhang Cheng stroked his chin, falling into a sudden, suffocating silence.
Maybe. It was the ones they called true humans.
Lu Linhai went rigid, the blood draining from his face.
What? That's impossible! Humans didn't exist that far back.
Zhang Cheng shook his head, his eyes burning with a manic, feverish heat.
By the textbooks, you're right. We were nowhere to be found. But consider the possibility, just for a moment. What if humanity had already peaked? What if an advanced civilization had already risen to power back then? To carve out a world perfectly tailored for their own dominance, those ancient humans decided to wipe out every single threat in their path. The freaks were the first on the list for total eradication.
His analysis remained chillingly detached, cutting through the horror with clinical precision.
Then, to bury the evidence of their crimes, they constructed the myth of biological evolution. It explains why that man referred to the masters as the creators.
His voice sharpened, the speed of his thoughts beginning to outpace his speech.
I remember reading a theory once. It suggested that humanity has reached the pinnacle of civilization multiple times, achieving heights we can't even dream of. But those eras always ended. A catastrophe, a collapse. Our current world is just a jagged shard of a much greater vessel. But what if it wasn't an accident? What if they chose to vanish? What if they intentionally dismantled their world, leaving only this hollow shell behind?
Lin Yi's gaze dropped to the cold, heavy shotgun resting in his palms. Whether Zhang Cheng's conjectures were the product of a brilliant mind or sheer madness, he couldn't say. Yet the sleek energy cylinders and the crystalline key were undeniable remnants of a science that defied everything they knew of their own world.
What could possibly be the motive for such a massive deception?
Lu Linhai's brow was deeply etched with a map of confusion.
I have no answer for that.
Zhang Cheng admitted, a sharp lateral shake of his head.
If we could only secure that stranger?
His voice lost its strength, dissolving into a barely audible murmur. He swept a quick, piercing look over Lin Yi and the rest before cutting the thought short. His eyes remained fixed on the horizon, fueled by a hunger for the truth that bordered on obsession. But without the gifts the others possessed, the distant struggle remained a blurred, unreachable mystery to him.
Pay attention!
He urged, nudging Lin Yi with a sharp elbow.
What is he saying now? I need every syllable, every inflection.
Lin Yi narrowed his eyes, pouring every ounce of his focus into the distant scene. A rhythmic, throbbing pain pulsed behind his eyes, and the storm of sounds threatened to overwhelm him, but he refused to yield.
It's pointless.
Lin Yi finally said, a slow shake of his head.
The man is just venting, screaming nothing but vile, hateful slurs. And he's methodically breaking that freak.
In the distance, the man's voice rose in a torrent of profanity, each word saturated with a cold, visceral loathing. His hatred for the creatures was absolute. With a sickening series of cracks, he stripped the dorsal spines from the beast's carapace before plunging his fist through the thick, chitinous shell on its back. He seized the lone remaining wing sheltered beneath the wreckage and methodically shredded it into jagged crimson scraps. The tentacles sprouting from the mantis wolf's belly whipped through the air, desperate to ensnare their tormentor. It was a futile effort. He caught the thrashing appendages midair with casual ease. No matter how the creature bucked and clawed, he remained an immovable, terrifying force. The sharp reverse barbs of the tentacles scraped uselessly against his reinforced metal gauntlets. With a sudden, savage pull, he ripped the limbs away, taking the soft underbelly of the mantis wolf with them. Lin Yi faltered, his mind recoiling from the idea of putting the carnage into words.
Should we do something to help them?
Chu Yun's voice was a mere breath, fragile and uncertain. Her compassion stemmed from the strange behavior of these wild mantis wolves. They were nothing like the ravenous predators of the city. In their moments of deepest vulnerability, the pack had not only spared them, but had seemingly provided nourishment once they regained consciousness. Even after Lin Yi had nearly obliterated one of their own, the pack had responded with a level of understanding that was as baffling as it was unsettling. But before the echoes of her question could fade, Zhang Cheng's head snapped to the side in a sharp, definitive negative.
Impossible.
He stated, his voice flat and devoid of any hesitation.
Interference is out of the question.
His composure was chilling, a stark contrast to the violence unfolding nearby.
We struggled against those freaks even at our best, and we were already pushed to the brink of exhaustion. But this stranger, he is erasing them with casual effort. The scale of his power is simply beyond our current comprehension. We have no data on his full capabilities. Stepping into that clearing is a death sentence, nothing more.
Zhang Cheng's clarity was absolute. He saw the world in cold numbers and hard limits, knowing precisely where caution ended and suicide began. He was an architect of survival, fully cognizant of the boundaries of his own utility. Lacking the supernatural gifts of Lin Yi or the others, and without the brutal conditioning of Chengdao's training, he knew he was physically the weakest among them, perhaps even outmatched by Chu Yun in a direct fight. This vulnerability was the catalyst for his role. From the moment he joined them, he had meticulously carved out his position as the group's intellectual anchor. His drive for truth was matched only by a quiet, fierce determination to ensure that every member of the team made it through the night. The shadows of the village fire still burned in Zhang Cheng's mind. He bore the weight of that error, the knowledge that his own misstep had beckoned the wild mantis wolves and imperiled the only people he had left. The unfamiliar ache of failure was a heavy, suffocating shroud. It had been years since he had allowed himself to be so vulnerable to his own mistakes. Beneath his clinical armor, a desperate protectiveness had taken root. For so long, he had been an island, a solitary thinker navigating a world of skin-wearing masks. Then came Lin Yi and the rest. They were a sudden, blinding fracture in the darkness of his isolation, a sliver of warmth that he found himself reaching for despite his own cynicism. The heat, the brilliance, it was intoxicating. It made him want to tear down the barricades he had spent a lifetime reinforcing. The prospect of losing even one of them was unendurable. It was the true source of his constant, sharp admonishments to Lin Yi, a desperate plea to stop gambling with a life that had become precious to him. His care for them was a quiet, fierce constant in the storm of their survival. Even his solitary gamble in the parasite-infested village hadn't been born of distrust. It was the act of a man desperate to prove his worth to the only group that mattered. Deep down, the intellectual in him screamed to capture the stranger. The man was a walking encyclopedia of the world's hidden truths. But his cold, analytical logic ruthlessly suppressed the impulse. Exposure now would result in nothing less than their complete and final annihilation.
Intervention is impossible, and lingering is suicide.
Zhang Cheng declared, his face hardening into a grim mask of resolve.
We must retreat now. If we are still here when he finishes with that creature, he will turn his attention to us.
Us?
Lu Linhai's eyes widened, the shadow of a horrific realization crossing his features.
You mean to him we're nothing more than livestock?
Zhang Cheng looks out into the distance, his eyes cold and calculating. He begins to break down the threat they're facing.
First of all, he's operating solo. In this wasteland, that's a testament to his power. He clearly doesn't fear the freaks in the shadows.
The proof of his lethality was scattered across the clearing. He had crushed a mantis wolf's armor like it was nothing more than thin glass. Ripping through those lethal tentacles with his bare hands wasn't just courage, it was the act of a dominant hunter. Zhang Cheng paused, his voice low as he continued his analysis.
He said the fire brought him here. It's a long trek from the hair snail village, yet he found his way, and he's not in any rush. A man who's short on time doesn't stop to play with his food. He would have finished that mantis wolf and moved on by now. The way he spoke, it was pure, cold hatred. When he's finished toying with that one, the real hunt begins. He'll search every corner of these woods for anything that crawls.
If he's so eager to exterminate freaks, why not head back to the city? It's infested with them. He could kill for a lifetime and never run out of targets.
Zhang Cheng shook his head slowly, a grim expression on his face.
It's not that simple. You can kick a stray in the alley without a second thought, but you don't touch a dog with a master unless you're looking for a fight. This man is a killer, but even he has strings. He wouldn't dare cross the masters. After all, you have to respect the owner before you strike the beast.
Lin Yi felt a chill of realization. Zhang Cheng's logic was flawless. If this stranger truly hailed from the city of Oracle, he was nothing more than a tool for the elite. Even in a city teeming with monsters, he would still be a servant. A hunter allowed to cull the weak, but never to challenge the true power. He could vent his rage on the wild creatures out here, but the ones in the city were protected. We were the only ones truly outside the law. Zhang Cheng's voice was heavy with bitterness as he spoke again.
In their eyes, we're just property, livestock, and escaped livestock at that. If he spots us, do you really think he'll just wave goodbye?
His lip curled with a hint of disdain.
A good hound doesn't just catch the rabbit. It brings it back to the master to earn its keep.
The weight of his words settled over them. Lu Linhai and Chu Yun exchanged worried glances, their confidence wavering.
If we just walk away, what happens to Flower? Is she in danger?
It's not just her. What about the other freaks? The ones that have been bringing us food this whole time?
Zhang Cheng's head snapped around, his eyes narrow. He had been completely out of the loop until now.
Flower? Who or what is a flower? We're balanced on the edge of a blade, fighting for our lives, and you're worried about a plant?
He gestured toward the bleak, twisted landscape surrounding their hideout.
Look at this place. There's nothing but dead wood and rot. Where do you see any flowers?
Chu Yun looked at him, her expression soft but firm as she corrected him.
Zhang Cheng, Flower isn't a plant. She's a person, a girl, and she's beautiful.
How beautiful!
He blinked, catching himself as his curiosity got the better of him for a split second.
Wait, no, that's not what I meant. This flower, is she actually human?
She's something even better. She's one of the God-chosen. She has this incredible scent, like a sweet sedative. It's the only reason any of us have managed to get some real rest.
Zhang Cheng's voice trailed off as he began to mutter to himself, his mind already racing with new possibilities.
Human and God-chosen. That would change everything.
Lin Yi's cold voice cut through the air, shattering the group's fragile hope.
Flower isn't human, not even close.
He paused, his gaze fixing on them with an intensity that demanded attention.
She's a freak.
Without wasting a breath, he laid out the gruesome details of everything he had witnessed the night before. Lu Linhai and Chu Yun stood frozen, the shock written clearly on their faces as the reality set in.
What? So, everything, the heartbeat you heard, it was all just a performance?
Lin Yi gave a slow, deliberate nod.
A perfect mimicry. She's stronger than any monster we've encountered before, and much, much more intelligent.
Chu Yun's voice trembled as she voiced the question that was likely on all their minds.
But she didn't hurt us, did she? Even after you saw her true form, she let us be. She even warned us to leave.
Lin Yi didn't have an answer. He simply fell silent, his eyes reflecting the deep uncertainty of their situation. Lin Yi couldn't push Chu Yun's point aside. She was right. Despite their horrific nature, Flower and her kin hadn't acted as their enemies. They had provided sustenance, and even after he had lost consciousness the previous night, he had woken up completely untouched. Whatever her true intentions were, they remained a mystery. But a new, more tactical thought began to form in his mind.
Maybe we don't need to be in such a rush to leave just yet.
Zhang Cheng's brow furrowed, his analytical mind immediately searching for the logic behind Lin Yi's suggestion.
Why? What have you realized? Flower might be a freak, but that sleeping scent of hers is undeniably effective. It can drop anyone in seconds. That stranger out there, he's powerful, but he has no idea she's even in the area, so...
So if she makes her move, he'll be out cold before he can even blink.
Lin Yi gave a single sharp nod of confirmation. Flower's fragrance was capable of blanketing an immense area. When they were fighting those wild mantis wolves, Lin Yi hadn't even realized she was there until the scent hit him. Looking back, she might have been masking her heartbeat even then. And her movements, even with his newly sharpened senses, the sounds of her footsteps had been completely lost in the noise of the forest. But none of those details mattered now. If the stranger was caught off guard, she could neutralize him before he ever realized he was being hunted. Lin Yi turned his gaze back toward the distance, his focus intensifying. Flower viewed those freaks as her family. She wasn't going to stand by and watch them be slaughtered. She was going to strike. Just as Lin Yi had foreseen, the stranger's posture shifted. The man's eyes narrowed as he caught the first hints of the sweet, cloying aroma, but his realization came too late. His powerful frame began to sway, his balance failing him as the sedative took hold. As the man fell, a monstrous freak erupted from the tree line, its movements fluid and terrifying. With its 6 insectoid legs, it clutched Flower, gliding effortlessly toward the fallen hunter.
It's Flower. She did it. Everyone, move now!
Lin Yi's shout shattered the silence of the cave as he led the group out. The stranger was a different kind of threat compared to them. Their own actions had been born of desperation and self-defense. But this man was an executioner, a predator who had tortured for sport. Lin Yi watched as Flower approached the prone figure, a dark uncertainty clouding his mind. He wasn't sure if she would show any mercy.
Wait, we need to talk to him before she does anything.
Lin Yi's shout hung in the air, unfinished and unnecessary. The stranger was already completely incapacitated. Flower's freak companion descended with a soft flutter, and she stepped gracefully onto the forest floor. She stood over the fallen hunter, her expression as unreadable and cold as ever.
Is he going to be okay?
Flower didn't even acknowledge the question. She reached out and touched one of the glowing crystals embedded in the man's heavy gauntlets. The stranger's breathing seemed to even out, stabilizing as he settled into a deeper sleep.
Leave. Now. Before he wakes up.
Her voice was a soft command, leaving no room for argument.
But what about the masters? If he's a hound like you said, won't they be searching for him?
Zhang Cheng's mind was already jumping to the next threat, the logical consequences of their actions.
They are already here.
Flower turned her gaze toward the horizon, where the first faint gray light of dawn was beginning to pierce the darkness.
The real hunt has begun.